The late autumn sun filtered through the altitudinous, arched windows of the Forrester estate, casting golden stripes across the polished rustic bottoms, as Daphne paced nervously in the living room, her fritters clinging a crumpled piece of paper that she had been gaping at for what felt like an eternity. Her mind was a vortex of unbelief, expectation, and the bittersweet sting of long-suppressed recollections, as she replayed every hassle she had had with Dylan over the months. The horse laugh, the arguments, the awkward silences, and the transitory moments of connection that now took on a hanging new meaning. Each time Dylan had walked into the room, there had been commodity familiar about the way she held herself, the subtle gestures that echoed Daphne's own erraticisms, but Daphne had dismissed it, attributing it to coexistence, to the strange concurrence life frequently handed out in Los Angeles's grandly powered social circles. Yet now the verity could no longer be ignored. The DNA test results in her pulsing hands were irrefragable, spelling out a reality she had both stressed and endured for Dylan, the youthful woman she had watched grow from a distance, the woman who had intentionally captured her heart, was her long-misplaced son. 1,000 recollections surged forward unsought, of a time when she had been forced to give up a child, of gash-stained nights and rumored farewells, of the paining void that had no way truly healed despite the passage of times, despite the accomplishments and connections that had filled her life. Daphne felt her casket strain as a flood tide of emotion hovered to overwhelm her, a admixture of guilt, relief, and the faint, nearly fragile stopgap of redemption that only the possibility of reunion could bring. She allowed. Of all the moments she had missed, the first way, the first words, the birthday celebrated in someone differently's arms, and the pang was nearly unsupportable, yet it was accompanied by a conditional spark of joy that maybe, eventually, the history could be conformed with the present. Outdoors, the sound of business was muted, distant, as though the world itself had hushed in reverence to the disclosure, giving her this private moment to grapple with the enormity of it all. Daphne's mind contended with questions. How had Dylan no way known? How had fate allowed their paths to cross so numerous times without either realizing the verity? And most pressing of all, how would she tell Dylan? How could she conceivably convey the times of love, anguish, and craving that had shaped her life without shocking or alienating the woman standing right before her, blissfully ignorant of the connection that bound them? She could feel the gashes forming, hot and unsought, and she brushed them down angrily, punishing herself for this display of vulnerability that she had long controlled, that she had long hidden beneath layers of countenance. But the disclosure demanded honesty, demanded battle with the raw, messy trueness of mortal emotion that cleaner operas thrived upon, that cult lived for. Daphne glanced at the family prints lining the mantel, at the smiling faces firmed in time, and wondered how numerous of those images had captured Dylan, maybe intentionally leaving traces of herself in the background of Daphne's recollections. Her heart pained with both the weight of loss and the exhilaration of detection, and as she moved toward the doorway, where Dylan had been casually seated moments ahead, she felt the paradoxical sensation of both a continuance and a single twinkle separating them. When she spoke, her voice quivered despite her sweat-set calm, carrying the graveness of the moment. Dylan, there's commodity you need to know, commodity I should have told you a long time ago. The air sounded to joggle with pressure, charged with the expectation of disclosure, and Dylan, seeing the unusual tone in Daphne's voice, turned to her, curiosity fluttering across her features, unconscious to the seismic shift about to review her understanding of identity, family, and belonging. The seconds stretched into an eternity as Daphne gathered the courage to ground decades of absence, with the many simple words that carried the weight of an entire continuance. You're my son, Dylan. The words hung in the air, fragile yet irrevocable, and in that moment the world sounded to cock, the room shrinking around them as the verity settled like a physical presence between mama and child, demanding acknowledgement, demanding response, demanding love. Dylan's eyes widened, a flash of shock giving way to confusion, and also to the slow, forming consummation that reshaped her entire history, that reframed every memory, every commerce, every inexplainable pull she had felt toward Daphne, and gashes, mirroring Daphne's own, began to coruscate in her eyes as the walls she had erected around herself began to deteriorate in the face of a connection that defied time, circumstance, and the cruel tricks of fate. The weight of the once pressed down upon them both, yet in the same breath the air sounded lighter, charged with possibility, with the pledge that what had been lost could maybe, through tolerance, courage, and love, be reclaimed. They moved toward each other tentatively, doubtful, yet drawn by an instinct that transcended times and separation, and as their hands met, as their eyes locked, a silent understanding passed between them. The bond of mama and son wasn't simply natural. It was eternal, imperishable, and now, eventually, inarguable. Outdoors, the golden light of the Los Angeles sun softened, bathing the room in warmth, as if the macrocosm itself conceded the reunion, as if the megacity had broke to substantiation the mending of a crack that had rotted in silence for far too long. And in that quiet, miraculous moment, Daphne and Dylan began the delicate, tender work of rediscovering each other, of weaving together the vestments of once and present into a shade that would define their future. A future filled with pledge, remission, and the unbreakable bond of love that had, against all odds, endured. The dialogue that would follow, the admissions, the gashes, the reluctant horse laugh, they were all a part of the trip, a trip that would stretch across occurrences, weeks, and months of the bold and the beautiful witching. Observers with its raw, mortal drama, with its heart-stopping twists and its poignant disquisition of family, identity, and the grim power of verity. Daphne felt the pressure in her shoulders ease, the miserliness in her casket soften, replaced by a fragile, luminous stopgap, and for the first time in decades, she allowed herself to imagine a life not defined by loss, but by presence, by connection, by the extraordinary phenomenon of reunion. Dylan, still recycling, reached out, and the contact sparked a waterfall of recollections, of instincts, of recognition that transcended explanation, and in that simple touch, mama and son set up protestation, grounding, and the first hint of trust in a relationship that had been suspended in time yet no way truly broken. It was a disclosure that would ripple through their lives, affecting Gemütlichkeit, loves and business alliances, kindling covetousness, curiosity, and admiration in equal measure. But in that room at that moment, none of that signified. What signified was the inarguable verity gaping them in the face, shimmering in the golden light, and as Daphne and Dylan embraced, the weight of times fell down, replaced by a profound, abiding connection that promised to endure whatever trials lay ahead, a testament to the enduring mortal spirit, the changeable beauty of fate, and the dateless power of love, the veritably substance of what the bold and the beautiful captured with every twist, every secret, every disclosure, every twinkle. Dylan stood firm for a moment, her mind reeling, the words, "You're my son," repeating over and over like a mantra she couldn't relatively process. She felt her knees weaken, and the elegant armchair she had been perched on moments before sounded suddenly shy to support her pulsing. Daphne, seeing the storm raging within her, stepped closer, her hands swimming in skyline as if hysterical to touch Dylan too soon, yet hopeless to ground the ocean of times between them. "I know this is inviting," Daphne said vocally, her voice a tale that carried the weight of decades. "I know I wanted to hurt you. I know I wanted you to feel abandoned. But circumstances, they were beyond my control." Dylan's eyes lustered with unshed gashes, and she turned her aspect toward the window, the Los Angeles skyline stretching infinitely beyond, as if searching for answers in the horizon that life had so cruelly withheld. The room felt charged, nearly electric, as the verity settled into their knowledge. Memories Dylan had brushed away suddenly resurfaced in sharp relief, the transitory stitch of déjà vu when Daphne laughed, the odd sense of familiarity in the way Daphne signaled with her hands, the detail, inexplainable warmth she felt when in Daphne's presence, moments she had long dismissed as coexistence. Now, with the disclosure unveiled, each bitsy scrap of the once snapped into place like a piece of a grand mystification, revealing a picture that was both stirring and heartbreakingly cruel. All this time Dylan's voice quivered, slightly audible. "And I know we knew?" Daphne's lips buckled and she shook her head, her own gashes now slipping freely down her cheeks. "I know I wish I could have been there for you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But the world had other plans. I had to let you go. I allowed. It was the only way to keep you safe." Dylan turned completely to face her now, her own gashes discovering freely, and for the first time, they truly looked at each other not as non-natives, not as familiarity, but as mama and son, bound by a connection that time, distance, and circumstance could no way ramify. "Safe deposit box," Dylan repeated, incredulous. "You suppose giving me up made me safe? You suppose leaving me in the hands of non-natives, of people I didn't indeed know, made it better? Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up not knowing who you are? Not knowing your family, feeling like a piece of yourself is missing?" Daphne squinched at the intensity of Dylan's words, but she understood them. They were justified, they were real, and they were the echo of her own failure. She moved closer, extending her hands cautiously. "I know," she rumored. "And I'm so sorry. Every single day I've rued it. Every single day I've wondered where you were, what you were doing, if you were happy." Dylan's casket heaved, and for a long moment silence hung between them, thick and stifling, yet charged with an implied verity. This was just the morning, not the end. Outdoors, the faint hum of the megacity sounded to fade into nullity compared to the tempest raging within the walls of the Forrester estate. The study of all the questions she had to ask, the trueness she demanded to uncover, made Dylan's mind spin. "There's so much I need to know," she said eventually, her voice fragile but determined. "Why? How? Where were you? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Daphne jounced, feeling the weight of every question pressing upon her shoulders, knowing that the answers would bear honesty, courage, and the careful unraveling of decades of secrets. Over the coming several hours, Mama and son sat together, the original shock giving way to conditional discussion, admissions, and the conditional reconditioning of trust. Daphne told Dylan about the circumstances that had forced her to give her up, the pitfalls, the complications, the manipulations by people in positions of power who had mandated her choices. She spoke of nights spent crying alone in her apartment, craving for a son she couldn't see, and the grim pang of absence that had shaped every decision in her life. Dylan, in turn, participated her own jests, her nonage struggles, her moments of loneliness, the feeling of always being deficient, and the strange, inexplainable draw she had always felt toward Daphne. Each disclosure strengthened their bond, each concession a step toward mending, though both knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But the Forrester world, as always, was no way quiet for long. Just as Daphne and Dylan began to attune, the phone on the mantel buzzed insistently. Daphne glanced at it, her heart sinking. It was Steffi. And if Steffi had called, it could only mean trouble. Daphne dithered, also picked up, her voice steady despite the tumult inside her. "Hello," she said. "Daphne." Steffi's voice was sharp, critical. "I just heard about Dylan. Is it true? Is she really?" Daphne held up a hand, her voice calm but establishment. "Yes, Steffi. Dylan is my son, and I need time with her. Please don't intrude right now." There was a pause on the line, a admixture of shock and curiosity in Steffi's silence, before she eventually said, "Of course. But you know this is going to change everything. Everyone's going to want to know. And Bill, well, you know how he reacts to anything involving the Logan family." Daphne soughed, pinching the ground of her nose, knowing Steffi was right. The disclosure would ripple through the Forrester and Spencer worlds, stirring covetousness, rapacity, and conspiracy. But for now she had Dylan. And that was all that signified. Dylan, eavesdropping fractions of the discussion, looked at Daphne with an admixture of admiration and apprehension. "The world everyone's going to know?" she asked vocally. Daphne jounced. "Ultimately. But we'll face it together. You and I, step by step." Dylan reached for Daphne's hand, and this time the contact was no longer conditional. It was firm, anchoring them both in a participated reality that had formerly sounded insolvable. The coming days were a whirlwind. Dylan plotted to acclimate to the verity, balancing her particular life, her work, and the shocking disclosure of her natural mama. Daphne, meanwhile, set up herself navigating not only the delicate process of reconnecting with Dylan, but also the complex social dynamics of Los Angeles's nobility, where secrets, backstabbings, and alliances could make or break reports overnight. As Mama and son ventured out into public spaces together, whispers followed them. Associates and musketeers approached with conservative congratulations, while others watched with dubitation, their motives unclear. Every commerce was a memorial that the disclosure was no longer private. It was a seismic event with consequences far beyond their immediate bond. Meanwhile, the ripple effect reached the Forrester family in unanticipated ways. Ridge, intrigued and kindly, invidious of the mama-son reunion, began probing questions, his curiosity masked with polite concern. Brooke, ever the emotional firecracker, oscillated between excitement for Daphne and covetousness at the attention Dylan now commanded. Eric, with the wisdom of age, observed still, understanding that family dynamics had shifted irrevocably, and that alliances would need to be reconsidered in light of this new reality. Dylan, thrust into this intricate web of connections, felt both empowered and overwhelmed, realizing that being Daphne's son came with a heritage, liabilities, and scrutiny she had no way anticipated. Indeed, outside the family, the disclosure stirred conspiracy. At Forrester Creations, whispers of Dylan's identity spread through the office like campfire. Workers suspected about how this would affect business alliances, customer connections, and the internal power structure. Some were probative, others skeptical, and a many aphorism occasion in the bouleversement. Dylan, preliminarily concentrated on her own intentions, suddenly set up herself at the center of attention, her every move anatomized and her every word counted. Daphne, defensive as ever, guided her precisely, offering wisdom, caution, and unwavering support, knowing that while the world's eyes were on them, the strength of their bond would be their guard. Gloamings came a sanctuary for Mama and son. They would retreat to the Forrester estate, participating reflections, stories, and horselaugh that had been absent for decades. Each discussion, each participated secret, was a slip-up in the foundation of a relationship rebuilt from the ashes of the history. Yet, despite these tender moments, pressure dallied. Dylan's curiosity about her father's identity, about the circumstances of her relinquishment, and about the people who had told her early life, drove her to ask questions that indeed Daphne plotted to answer. "There are effects you don't know yet," Daphne admitted one evening, her eyes misty. "Effects I've kept hidden to cover you and occasionally to cover myself." Dylan jounced, seeing the graveness in Daphne's words. "I want to know everything," she said forcefully. "I need to understand my life, who I am, and why effects happened the way they did." Daphne soughed, knowing that verity would be both liberating and painful, yet essential for Dylan to claim her identity completely. Days turned into weeks, and sluggishly, the mama-son relationship solidified. They navigated public appearances, private exposures, and the ineluctable complications that arose when long-promised family members reunited. They laughed, argued, cried, and assured each other, discovering the depth of connection that could only live between a parent and child, a connection forged in absence but strengthened by reunion. Dylan began to integrate Daphne into her diurnal life, introducing her to musketeers, associates, and familiarity, while Daphne participated her own world, her recollections, and her wisdom, guiding Dylan through challenges she had faced decades before. The narrative of their reunion came a caption within the Forrester and Logan families, egging alliances, battles, and unanticipated Gemütlichkeit. Secrets long buried began surfacing, revealing a web of conspiracy, ambition, and emotion that only heightened the drama of their world. And through it all, Daphne and Dylan remained anchored to each other, their bond a constant amid the chaos, their love a lamp of stopgap in a world where deception and treason frequently overshadowed verity. Yet, despite the joy of reunion, the shadow of the history remained. There were unanswered questions, moping resentment, and the ever-present pressure of public scrutiny. Dylan grappled with passions of wrathfulness toward the circumstances that had separated them, while Daphne faced guilt for choices she had made under constraint, knowing that conciliation needed further than acknowledgement. It needed courage, honesty, and the amenability to defy pain without turning down. And as the sun set over Los Angeles each evening, casting long golden murk across the Forrester estate, Mama and son would sit together in quiet reflection, holding hands, participating stories, and featuring of a future where the once no longer mandated their lives, a future where the bond of family, eventually restored, would guide them through whatever trials awaited, and where love, remission, and adaptability would triumph over loss, treason, and time itself. The following morning, Daphne awoke to the soft hum of the megacity, sun streaming through the curtains, but rather of comfort, it brought a renewed anxiety. She glanced at the empty side of the bed where Dylan had stayed the night, wondering what studies swirled in her son's mind. Moments laterally, Dylan appeared in the doorway, her hair slightly tousled, eyes still carrying the faint hint of gashes from the night ahead. "Mama," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I can't stop allowing about everything. The times we lost, the effects I'll no way get back, but also about what we can make together." Daphne rose, moving toward her, heart swelling with both relief and moping guilt. "I know," she rumored, brushing a beachfront of hair from Dylan's face. "We can't change the history, but we can shape the unborn, together." Dylan jounced, a admixture of determination and vulnerability in her aspect. Outdoors, the megacity carried on obliviously, ignorant that within these walls, a continuance of separation had eventually been bridged. And as Mama and son embraced formerly more, it came clear that this was further than reunion. It was a new morning, a chance to rewrite their story with love, trust, and the imperturbable bond of family eventually reclaimed.